So having said all that, let me introduce you to Zabine. Zabine is really an old friend. We've been friends forever. But Zabine has a wonderful story to tell, a story of adventures, a story of, just growing up in Germany, being born in Germany when the war was going on. And Zabine has faced a lot of challenges. Zabine has faced a lot of adventure. And ultimately, Zabine is currently and now living in Seattle, where Zabine runs a Seattle Unity Museum. Is that correct,
Yep,
Zabine? Is that
the Unity Museum, right?
it's the Unity Museum, which in pictures and
Exhibits.
exhibits and trains that move and stop at different ages tell us about the growth and changes that society has faced over the last 150, 160 years. And if any of you are planning to go to Seattle, and I am planning to go to Seattle in April, by the way, there's the Indian musician coming and she's going to perform in Seattle, and I'm going to come to that concert. So if any of
Here
you
I
were
thought it
planning,
was me, and now the
no,
truth
I'm
comes
coming.
out.
I'm coming to see you too, but I'm definitely coming to this concert of this woman who's one of
Cool.
my favorite people,
Yeah.
but is not coming to Texas. She's only coming to New
Oh,
York and Seattle. So
that's
uh,
God's plan, not your plan.
I know, but that's how it sometimes works out. Uh, I really want to recommend highly that if you have an opportunity to go to Seattle and visit the Seattle Unity Museum, you do so and do so as quickly as possible, because every week time you go up there, it looks different. She's added something to it. She's changed it around a little bit. Uh,
Oh, yeah.
the Seattle Unity Museum is directly across the street from the University of Washington, and she gets a lot of very young people. And these people are from all over the world, people,
Yeah.
foreign people, American people, they all come by, have a cup
150
of
a month.
coffee, and
150 a month.
150 a month. I recently heard that Zabine's museum has gotten a big award from the American Museum Association of American Museums, or something, which is wonderful and deserving of congratulations. Having said all that, um, I'm delighted that Zabine agreed to come on and talk to us this evening and tell us her story about how she became a Baha'i and how she's where she is today. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Zabine.
Hi. So, as already, thank you, Ajit. As Ajit mentioned, we're going to probably do a redo on this because this is not about my story. This is really about seeing the photographs, seeing the places and times, and having to experience it pictorially, not just chitty chatty talk about it, right? So, but today, usually in screen sharing, it just brings up my screen. I don't know why we weren't able to figure it out, but there we are. So this is too bad, but we're a small group, so we're okay. And then maybe another time we can redo this, what I call more, do it better. So it all started off and born in 1942. So I'm 80. And so born in 1942, I'm born on the Hanseatic city in Nordenham, right on the North Sea, sort of, Nordic right there, hugging the North Sea. And at my time, obviously, when I was born, we were moving into a war. So if I look at Ukraine today and I see those people in shelters and I see the people in the Ukrainian children running through the streets and so on, I have exactly the same memory because I was in Bremerhaven where you had the Luftwaffe. And so then at the ending of the war, naturally, Bremerhaven was totally bombed out. And so when I see the cities in Ukraine, I see Nordenham, I see my own hometown. And I know the feeling. And unless you've lived underneath bombs in shelters, and unless you've experienced that, it's just describing to men what it feels like to be pregnant and give birth. It's just not going to work. And however, when I traveled to, let's say, Vietnam, they totally got it. When I went to Romania, they understood it. I talked to maybe wherever we are, it's probably, unless your experience was similar, it's not about being occupied. It's really about being bombed. There's a difference between being bombed and being occupied. I only lived in occupied Germany, so I know what it's like to be occupied Germany. So here I am born, and eventually the city was bombed out. And I have pictures of all of that, so I'm so sorry you can't see it. So eventually my father moved us over to Nordenham, and where I lived in my remaining time in Germany. And it was mostly agriculture. Lots of it was dairy, to be honest, and lots of it was fishing port, the North Sea. And so we're famous for our fishing. And the time that really became very much of a major problem, to be honest, was when Chernobyl occurred. And the cows in my hometown were beginning to die because it drifted across, from Chernobyl up to the North Sea, the wind, the currents, and it was killing the cows in my hometown. But that was after I had left Germany. So I'm basically grown up. Now I'm a young teenager. And all of a sudden one day, I'm so bad you don't have the pictures. So all of a sudden one day in school, I'm in middle school now, and I go to my mother and my grandmother, and I have heard of Anne Frank's diary. And I said, Mom, who's Anne Frank? And they were sort of pauses and stalling, and I'd never heard of the Holocaust. I'd never heard of the history, because at that time my school, that was where I had to go to school, and it was in an old airplane factory because things were destroyed. It was in an old airplane factory, so it wasn't really a school, but it was about 3 miles away, and all the teachers were mostly female because the men at that time were still captured and in Russia or in various camps, right? So they hadn't really yet made it home during my era, my early youth era in middle school. And then the dread always was when, we were so young, and all of a sudden there would be one of our students, we had the first year was only one class, the second year was the second class, because it was right after the year. Like a roommate would come all excited, he says, "Oh, Daddy came home." And we all knew what not to ask, but we all thought the same thing. And the question always was, what's missing? Is it an arm? Are his eyes? Are his legs? What is missing? We knew that they were emaciated because they walked from St. Petersburg, whatever the men came home from during my occupation time, right? So it was always really hard. In our classroom, we always knew how to support that young person who suddenly got that back. And it was always very exciting, and it was always joy. So I know the joy of, having the family, some families back together. Eventually, my grandfather left for America. My father met somebody else and moved to South Germany. So basically, I'm brought up by my mother and my grandmother. And it was very hard for them, and it was very difficult, but I'm brought up in an opera house that was turned into a silent movie theater. So I lived above the silent movie theater, and that was my world, but my escape, right? And at a very young age, I used to go to the pier where the boats were, and they came from America all over the world, and I see all the flags. And I say to my teacher in school, I'm going to go around the world. I'm going to see the whole world. I wanted to see all the flags on the ships, right? I was only about 6, 7 years old. By the time I was 8 years old, I'm going to go to Albert Schweitzer in Lambaréné, Africa, and I'm going to be with Albert Schweitzer. Well, that didn't happen either. And so eventually, so I just want to give you a quick, brief idea of what it was like. So I'm living with my mother and my grandmother above the opera house, or the movie theater. And I had 2 brothers. So here comes dinner time. Remember, during that time, we were starving. What you didn't grow, you didn't eat. And yes, there was we had a can where we would get our milk, and we could have, bread, but I mean, sugar was rare, and the shops were only partially open, and they did their best. We didn't have, like QFC or Safeway. It was like a little boutique kind of things, right? So, we would have soup. We would have during the week soup and bread. And then finally, at the end, it always came to that. It was always that one piece of bread left. Now, remember, we're all hungry still. Just because we ate and had dinner, it doesn't mean we're full up. It just means we kind of fought off hunger, right? And starvation, basically. And that last piece of bread, who's going to eat that last piece of bread? I was one day in Bellevue in the museum, and a Russian lady who I'd never met before comes in with her grandson. And remember, Russia and Germany weren't friends, right? Comes in with her grandson, and she looks at me and she says to me, "I heard you're German." I said, "Yes." And I became a citizen back in the 60s. I said, "Yes." And she says to me, "I want you to tell my grandson the story of the piece of bread." I knew what she meant. She knew, I knew, we both knew because we were there. This is how it was, right? So here you have two brothers and mother and her mother sitting there. Now, grandma isn't going to eat that bread because her daughter's got 3 kids, and that she's not going to touch that piece of bread. Mom's not going to touch this piece of bread because she's got 3 kids and the mother's sitting there. My brothers aren't going to touch that piece of bread, and I sure wasn't going to touch it. Who's going to eat it? So we had a hierarchy of fighting of starvation. And then we just decided that the kids would always come and, we would break that piece of bread into 3 pieces, and the 3 kids would share it. Anyway, so we had a hierarchy of that piece of bread. Now comes the butter story. And I don't mean to sound here like, oh, this is not about me. Please allow it. But the title, it kind of has me in it. So I've got to share a little bit about me, because this is really about the faith. Ultimately, why did I become a Baha'i? But in order to understand the beginning, you have to understand why I then became the Baha'i. So then comes the butter story. My mom one day says, I was the oldest one, and she said, "Go to the Mulcahy," which is kind of the dairy place, "and can you go and pick up the butter?" We rarely had butter. I mean, this was a thing of rarity. So I go down there, all proud. Mom gave me I get the butter, and halfway home from the dairy, I look at this butter. I was starving for that butter. And I thought, I know what, if I just put my finger in it, she won't notice. And I can just, take a little bite of that. And then, I would cover it up and smooth it out and close it, but I couldn't stop. So I must have taken like a quarter of the butter and hugged it down. And then I realized a big hole missing. And I thought, oh my God, what am I doing? I couldn't really smooth it up. So I covered it up and I brought it home. I gave it to my mother. And my mother and my grandmother both set me down at the table. I'm 80. I have never forgotten it, nor will I ever forget it. They said, "Do you realize, I know you're hungry. I know you're starving, but do you realize that you made all 5 of us suffer and have no butter according to what I had asked you to get? And you allowed it for your selfish reasons to think that you could indulge yourself." Whoa, that went deep. And everybody, I felt so shame. I can't believe I did that. I was just, immature and selfish and egotistic and all of that. And but the lesson I learned: never judge a country that is in wartime, that's in survival, or people that are in survival. They can't really apply the ethics or character or morality as a normal person that is in a state of what I call survival mode, because it's too hard for them to understand. And when you're immature like me, you eat a piece of the butter. I mean, what were you thinking? Anyway, I've always remembered the lesson. Okay, so I said to my grandmother, "Mom, how could you vote for him? Grandma, I'm so embarrassed now. I'm ashamed. I heard there's something as a Holocaust." And Frank, and she was a little bit older than me, but not by much, right? I said, "How could that happen?" And my grandmother said to me, she said, "Sabine, sit down for a minute." She says, "Grandpa served in Turkey in World War I. When he came back with his sleeping sickness, when he came back and survived Constantinople, you know, when he survived all of that, he said Germany was pretty well bombed out and devastated. And here we are surviving. I always wondered why we had a picture of Constantinople in my, you know, in my living room. Never made sense, but I just always thought, oh, well, there's Constantinople. I guess my grandma likes Constantinople. And then, so then she says, and here comes this man who looked nice. She said, enough. And he says, I give you Autobahns. I give you Volkswagens. I give you radios. I put everybody to work. Everybody will eat again. Why on earth, when you have a family, wouldn't you vote for him? She said, we had no idea what the plan was. We had no idea. And in my hometown, I just saw 2 TV Ken Burns specials, fascism in Germany and fascism in America. And they talked about how fascism in Germany, how Hitler worked very hard at keeping the Holocaust away from the public because he knew he wouldn't get the support on that. And in my hometown, only one jewelry store closed. And when the jewelry store closed, which was owned by a Jewish family, people thought he just moved to a different place. And I have never, ever in my entire time in Germany, until Anne Frank's diary came out, the first time I heard about the Holocaust and concentration camps. And I was shocked. Anyway, so now I am 16. And my mother decided that I had this sort of this attitude that maybe I should go and then my travel of 65 countries began. So the first place I went to into England as an au pair. And I stayed and I choose in my, you know, where I was at 16, 17, I choose a Jewish family because I was going to show, you know, the world. And, you know, I was not going to be like my parents and like, you know, and all of that. So I stayed with this wonderful Jewish family and I was an au pair and they had a 2-year-old. So they had a birthday for the little 2-year-old. And in England, we serve tea, but you don't just put cream sugar on the table. You serve it in the kitchen. It was my job to bring it in. And there were about 30 people sitting there, right? So I had to ask everybody, do you want cream and sugar, right? So I got it just right. So I asked around and I get in the kitchen. Then about 3, 4 people, I forgot whether they wanted cream and sugar. My English was not that good. So I go back to that and I say, excuse me, did you want cream and sugar? And did you want hot milk? You know, and then suddenly the entire room shunned me. For the first time in my young life, I have learned and I have experienced, whilst it was a cultural, whilst it was completely understandable, I don't want you to say that I didn't understand it. It's just I have never experienced and not really experienced it again to this degree. The entire room suddenly shunned me. And I asked the next person, I thought, oh, my English is not good enough. I asked, and then I asked somebody else. I realized something was terribly wrong. So I backed out of the room and went in the kitchen. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't know what I did, but nobody is looking at me. They said, oh, Sabine, that's my fault. All my au pairs had been from Scandinavia. And they thought that you were Swedish or Danish. And they just found out you're German. Not good. She said, so, you know, and then some of them came out of camps and London Blitz. And you know what I mean? The whole thing was horrible. And she said, you can't go back in there again. She says, this is too traumatic for them, let alone, you know, for the young teenager, right? She said, it's too traumatic for them to have to look at you. So you never forget things like that, you know, it's traumatic to look at you. That's quite the message. So that was part of my learning. And so she said to me, but Sabine, in the evening when after everybody was gone, and I was just devastated. I thought, boy, my grandma was right. You know, I did a terrible mistake. I shouldn't have been here and all of that, right? And so she said to me, well, Sabine, in a couple of days, I want you to come shopping with me. And you go shopping to the butcher, baker, you know, candlestick maker, sort of like that. She said, come with me, but I want you to stand with me. I want you to, don't say anything, don't say a word. I want you just to observe. So this is just south of London. So we go shopping and we go to the bakery, and she walks in there and the store is pretty well full. And as she goes in, she doesn't say, you know, how we go and we go to the counter. She stands back. That was my first notice. And then when the store was finally empty, she walks to the front and she says, oh, could I have that piece of bread over there? He said, I'm sorry, no, it's spoken for somebody. And she said, oh yeah, I'm sorry. She said, he said, but we have 3-day-old bread if you want one of those. And she says, yeah, okay, I'll take that. We went to the butcher, same thing. She wanted this, had to wait for even though people came in after us, she waited until the shop was empty. She didn't go to the front or dare go to the front whilst the shop was full. She was a shop owner. She lived on Main Street, High Street. She was well known, but she was also known that she was Jewish. And so therefore, I went home really silent and quiet. And she says to me, now, you know, for you, you just went through it one day. I go through this every single day. And somehow it made me feel slightly better. And somehow it made me feel, oh my God, what are we doing to each other? But it was a lesson of a different kind. So I decided this was coming very traumatic and that maybe I should stay with a different family. So you may have heard of Supreme Court Justice Douglas's, and his daughter lived near Eton College and Windsor Castle. And so I stayed with her, and I was an au pair there. And of course, they were Americans. And I thought maybe that's a little better, right? So I'm staying with the Supreme Court Justice Douglas's daughter. And I just want to tell you quickly a story. So one day the phone rings and I answered the phone for her. And she said, oh, could I talk to Mrs. Wells was her name now, her married name. Could I talk to Mrs. Wells? And I said politely in my English, and who's calling, please? Well, my name is John F. Kennedy. I said, would she know who you are? Would she know who you are? And may I tell you exactly why you're calling? That was in the time when he was running for election. Of course, you know, anyway, everybody but me knew who he was, right? And so I said, I called down the road. I said, I don't know if you know him, but somebody, John F. Kennedy is calling. Oh, do you want to talk to him? You know. Anyway, she runs to the phone. She rips the phone out of my hand. And so I realized I entered really into a different world. So after a while, I then met my husband who just graduated from University of London and became a teacher. And we realized very quickly that we wanted to see the world. We had that in common. So we immigrated to Canada. My story now becomes a little boring because we go to Canada, Saskatoon, you know, prairies, flat, and I lived in England for a while. Then when he was a teacher, we moved to Bournemouth, a resort area, beaches. And I mean, it was gorgeous in England where we lived, right? And now we end up in the prairie, but that's because we wanted to travel. And his college, there were some teachers were in Saskatoon, so we ended there. And we took one look. So I know what it's like when you get on a boat from London through the English Channel, Southampton, English Channel, up through the English Channel, up through the Irish Sea, up across the Atlantic, going into the St. Lawrence River. You have one suitcase and $20 in your hand. I know an immigrant story, what it feels like. It's scary. You're not sure if you got a job, because we knew that his never met before friends from that same college say, oh, there's a job when you get here. But in other words, the train took like 2 days. Canada is big, right? And so, you know, and we got there at 5 a.m. We stood all alone in Saskatoon, and we thought, oh my God, I hope this is not a scam, you know. But the government had given us both of airline fares as long as we stayed there for 2 years. So we were cool, right? We had $20 and we made it to Saskatoon. And so I know the immigrant story, what it's like when you arrive with a loose suitcase and no money and hopes for the future, and you owe everybody you know what I'm saying, and then all of that. Anyway, we stayed for 2 years and traveled to LA. And my uncle and my mother's brother so lived there. And And we thought, wow, this is nice. This is much better than Saskatoon. And we said, I think I want to go somewhere. I want to live somewhere where you have palm trees and beaches, right? Like we had in England. And they said, oh, you like California. You would love Hawaii. We said, Hawaii? This is how stupid it was. Hawaii, is that America? You know? And we said, oh, yeah, that's America. We said, why go to California? Let's go to Hawaii. So we did. And I lived there for 30 years. All right. So now I'm in Hawaii, right? Am I boring you all? Please, you know,
No,
because
keep going.
okay, I'm leading up to, you know, why I became a Baha'i, all right? I'm leading up to the experience, who I'm becoming as this young person. So I'm arriving in Hawaii, I think I was 32. And 40, I'm born 42 and 65, right? So it's some in my 30s. And in Canada, the big deal is July 1. That's the big holiday. And he said, oh, let's not travel July 1. Let's travel a few days later. So it was July 4th. And we arrive in Hawaii. Well, bam, whoo, fireworks and the whole thing. But they told us in Canada when we got out, just because you got the visa, just because you're approved, just because, when you get there, they still can turn you down. And we were these two young kids, really. I mean, we were pretty young, right? And we had been quite fun. We go through the customs in Honolulu, and they say next, you know, and we had just our little suitcase, to be honest. Next, and we both turned around and we said, that's it, we're in. You know, it felt like that we were sort of, you know. And they said, oh yeah, your visa is just visa everything, all right, we're in. Oh yeah, go in, have a good time. It's July 4th, and we had no idea what it meant. So we catch the bus, and here we are arriving in Waikiki. Oh my God, you should have seen the fireworks. Never seen fireworks my life like that. So anyway, so now I'm in Hawaii for the next 30 years. So fast forward so Mike had to get an English degree in order to be a teacher in Hawaii. And after 2 years, he gets now his updated degree. And we said, oh, let's keep our adventure going. Let's sail into the Pacific, right? I mean, as young kids are, right? So we go into this trimaran and we sail out of Honolulu, and we're going to go to Nuku'hiva and go through Tahiti and everywhere. We're just going to be these world travelers and these young kids, you know, as you have these big dreams. So we go down to the harbor. Sure enough, we get this boat. And they just lost their crew. And so we get on this boat and we sail to the Pacific. Well, right away, we hit this bad storm. So never mind Nuku'hiva. So we could, okay, we better go straight down to the Line Islands and adjust the course so we don't all throw up and God knows what, right? So the Line Islands is Palmyra and Kiribati, it's called, right? So we get to the Kiribati, just around the equator. And the wind stops. We're in a sailboat. We only have a little bit of gas to get in and out of the slip. This is not a powerboat, right? So the sail stops and we're in the doldrums for 3 days. Now, I've heard these silly stories about doldrums, that people die and starve and all of that. And the captain is saying, and by the way, he made me the navigator with a handheld compass. I've never done that before. And and I'm saying, I made a mistake, and these islands are so tiny, and Honolulu is 2,000, you know what I'm saying? And I'm scared out of my wits, and they're all trusting me. He said, how hard can it be? There's the sun, just read the compass, right? And then he gave me the thing, and I plot it on the chart, right? And I said, well, how hard can it be? And so anyway, so then for 3 days, the garbage was still next to the boat. Oh, it's just horrible. And we thought we were going to run out of food, literally. And so because there were a number of us on the boat. Anyway, all of a sudden, after 3 days, the wind comes back, we start sailing. But because the wind came back, the pressure was so hard that the connection from the rudder to the wheel chafed through a cable this thick. It chafed through the cable. It was rubbing against something. And here we were now without a rudder. And we said, first the doldrums, now we're drifting without right in the middle of the Pacific and nowhere. And it began to occur to me that maybe I needed to start thinking about prayer, things like that. All of that. It occurred to me maybe that my life was not all that unscheduled as I thought. Anyway, so finally, Fred figured out how to tie ropes around. He figured it out. As long as we watched it, we would be able to make it. So we go to Palmyra. Wow, we got the islands, and I cut short a lot of stories in between. And nobody on the island, but we knew that. And there was an old canteen with dishes still in the sink and chessboard. And there were sharks all around us, so we couldn't go swimming. And mosquito drowned. A little landing place, because the U.S. military used it for emergency landing at one time. And the bunker that had lots of food in it. We thought, wow, we arrived in heaven, but there were no people there. And we thought we better get going. So we took some of the food, and we arrived in Fanning Island. And we sail in there, and this is the point of the story. We got there, and they said to us, "Oh, where'd you guys go? There's New Zealand." And so the custom from New Zealand customs are there. "Oh, welcome to Fanning Island. Where did you just come from?" We said, "Oh, Palmyra." And everybody froze. It reminded me of my moment in England, the shunning moment, right? Everybody froze, and I thought, "What's just happening here?" Right? And Fred said, "Oh, maybe I didn't say it clear. There's Palmyra, Fanning, like they didn't know where Palmyra, Palmyra, so at that degree and so on up north, right?" And they said, "When were you there?" And we said, "Well, we left about, I think it was 4 days. I forget just exactly what it was, right?" They said, "Are you sure?" So yeah, we looked at the log, our captain's log, right? They said, "Yep, that's about what it was." And we showed them they said, "Do you have proof of this?" They said, "Yeah," we showed them showed them the log, and they said, and they stamped it, say, "Come aboard, and we like to talk to you." So we're going, this is weird, right? So we go and talk to him, and they sit us down because 3 weeks before our departure, there was a sailboat that left Honolulu, and they took on crew just like us, right? Had Fred, there's a crew. And what happened, there's a book written about that and a movie made about this. Because what happened is that that crew couple murdered the owner of the boat. And what they did, they went to Palmyra and they buried them on Palmyra, took the boat, stupid enough, went back to Honolulu, changed the name of the boat, and eventually were caught. And the police in Honolulu informed Fanning Island that there had been a murder on Palmyra. And here we're coming within minutes, literally, of that, and saying, "We just came from Palmyra." And they had, so they tried to pull together. And of course, very quickly, they realized that we just basically escaped in the middle of a murder scene by this much. Remember, when life is not through with you, and when Baha'u'llah wants you still to go on and have a mission in life, sometimes he lets you escape by this much, the skin of your bones, right? Anyway, we finally left Palmyra and went to Samoa. And on the way there, we took on one of the people from Fanning Island. His wife, she wanted to, they caught her right. And anyway, she was pregnant. We had to give birth and was a stillbirth. It was a long story. It was a very tragic story. Anyway, long story short. So make it back to Honolulu. And then we moved to Oahu. From Oahu. And instead of going back to Oahu, we go to the big island. Here comes Kealakekua. This is now my Baha'i moment. Are you still with me? Tell me when you want me to stop. So now I'm in Kealakekua. You know that song, Little Grass Shack from Kealakekua, Hawaii, the song that everybody learns when they go to Hawaii. That's the one hula they all learn. So the school that Mike gets a job is in Kealakekua, Hawaii. And we live in this teacher's cottage for $25 a month, and it was like a U-shape, and that's really all we could afford because teachers' wages were really terrible. But so so Mike says one day that, how the witnesses and the Mormons and because we're all teachers, including the principal, lived in our teachers' cottages. One day Jehovah's Witnesses come and talk to me, and then the Mormons came and talked to us, and and so on. And one of the things my mother said, well, you just go right ahead. You go to America. I tell you what it is. You're going to go to gangster land. You're going to have guns all over the place. Every corner has a bar and a church. Good luck. I don't know why you want to go there. And I'm looking at the TV today and I'm going, oh my God, I think my mother was quite right, but that was, the culture interpretation, Chicago-like, and, all of that. Gangsterland is what she sued, and she never understood why her father and her brothers both wanted to live there. And anyway, so I thought, well, America's religion, every corner has a church, and boy, sure enough. And I said, I know nothing about America, but now I'm going, maybe I should be spiritual. Maybe there was something to that. My life had been a bit colorful. And so I decided to have Monday, Wednesday, Friday as Jehovah's Witness, Seventh-day Adventist, and Mormon, so I could learn about that religion, and did that for 6 months. So I made a big chart, and so we go to Kauai, and the Jehovah's Witness elder says, oh, go to Kauai, and I'd like you to meet some elders there so you see how global we are and everything. I go there, and I thought, wow, this is really not for me. And I go into a boutique, and there I see a Baha'i pamphlet on the jewelry counter. I was shopping for a bikini, to be honest. Crocheted bikini was the in thing at that time. When you're young and cute, you can do that, right? So I'm shopping for this crocheted bikini. And on the way there to the surfboards, I see this pamphlet. I open up the pamphlet, and in there it discusses progressive revelation, how all the religions were one. And I suddenly see and realize Hawaii, by now I'd been there, deeper into the Pacific, they were mostly Asian, like Chinese, Filipino, Japanese. Where I lived, everybody was Japanese. And yes, you had Christians, and yet you had Hindus. And here I was Lutheran, born Lutheran, and we had religion in school. You didn't have that separate church and state. So I got all my Christian education basically in my high school, right? So we had Bible study and everything, and everybody was white, blonde, and blue-eyed. So I never seen until I got to London, except for one day for less than 30 minutes, I never met a Black person in my life. Imagine living in a hometown so scrap clean, it's unbelievable. Now it's the opposite. Now you'll see, because it's different now. But at my era, it just didn't exist. When I came to London, I thought, wow, because what happened is when I was born, I had really, really curly hair. And the Viking, right? We had really, really curly hair, and most of them were, straight hair. And one day I'm going to the beach, and because we were in Bremerhaven, which was German occupation now, so the American military had arrived, and they went and to go to the same beach that I was on, the beach, right? And this little girl, my age, comes over. My mother tells me, because the people were watching it, and my mother watches me, and I go up to that little girl who's my age, and I point to her hair. And I said, oh, your hair is just like my hair. We both have curly hair. I didn't see the color. It was obvious to everybody that I didn't see anything except I saw the curly hair. And in my hometown, we kind of got teased about the curly hair. And so therefore, I was so excited, this other person's curly hair. And it took my mom a long time later on. She didn't really tell me about that for a long time because she thought, well, that's not a necessary conversation, right? But now being in Hawaii and now coming back to my story there, I'm hearing now progressive revelation, because my neighbor said, well, we are Buddhist and you better get used to it because everybody's Buddhist. And I said, well, I'm Lutheran and I don't know anything about that. I go to the library and all the books are Buddhism. And I thought, oh my God, took me years in high school to learn about Christianity. I can't believe I have to start all over again, but I want to choose something. And so I'm going through this heartache and I see this pamphlet. I said, do you mean to say, if I just say, oh yeah, okay, one God, everybody is the same, I don't have to study all of them in detail, and I can say, yes, I do, and this is cool, and I already believed in the principles when I read through them. And I looked at the owner of the store, who was a Baha'i. He is still alive. She died of cancer shortly after. And he noticed that I was looking at this, and I said to him, is this for real? And he said, oh, yeah, that's for real. And he said, where do you live? I said, I live in Kealakekua, Hawaii. And oh, he said, there's a guy there. His name is John Thurston. And just call John. And then, you know, he'll give you a book called Thief in the Night. Just ask him for it. Long story short, and I don't want to go into all the blah, blah, blah in between. So I get Thief in the Night. I put out to the charts. I get Thief in the Night questions and Mormon, Seventh-day Adventist, Jehovah's Witness. I wanted all the answers. I didn't want to have a Baha'i there because John gives me Thief in the Night and he leaves for the Pacific within 2 weeks. My luck, right? I just find something and then they disappear on me. And so anyway, so it started in July. And by January, on my mother's birthday, I had lunch for each one of them separately. And I thanked all of the elders and the ministers that they made a Baha'i out of me. And they said, what do you mean? You made a Baha'i out of you separately, right? I said, yeah, you made a Baha'i because Jesus this and this and my child. And I explained to them and what they felt. I felt that, yeah, anyway, you know, the German approach. Oh, I'm sorry, I get a little bit overdoing it. So I thought, okay, now I can become a Baha'i. Oops, how do you do that now? So I had to find the Baha'is, and I had to look around, not realizing I was a soul believer. You know that term, right? There weren't any there. Anyway, I found them in my mother's birthday. I dressed up European way, you know, beehive hairdo, petticoat, the whole thing, right? Looking nice. My mother's birthday, 9 o'clock exactly, not 1 minute late, not 1 minute early. Precisely, I ring the doorbell and I said, hi, my name's Zabine, and I'd like to become a Baha'i today. This lady was with her curlers still in her hair in a morning gown, and she opened the door about this much because some person died to bother her on this morning. And she said, you what? I said, yeah, I repeat it again, I'd like to become a Baha'i today. And she says, excuse me? And she leaves me standing there. By the way, I was 3 months pregnant. She leaves me standing there, and I kind of morning sickness, you know. And I hear on the phone, you better come over. I don't know that I never met her. I never seen that woman. I have no idea who she is. And she's telling me she wants to become, God knows what's going on over here. You better hurry over. And boom, down went the phone. And she comes back and she opens the door. I said, do you mind? Could I come in? I'm getting a little morning sickness here, you know. And so I go in and I sit down, right? And sure enough, within 5 minutes, she made small talk, right? In 5 minutes, Elson walks in, the first Hawaiian Baha'i who had worked with the Guardian, installing the Shrine of the Bab and interview. Anyway, he was a Knight of Baha'u'llah. I didn't know Emilia was also a Knight of Baha'u'llah. So here I'm dealing with 2 knights, right? And so Emilia said, well, Al, she wants to become a Baha'i today, and she hasn't read any of the books. And Al says, she what? She hasn't read any of the books, Al. And he said, she said, Sabine, is that your name? She said, tell me why you want to become a Baha'i. I said, oh, just a minute, please. You know, my chipper self. I go to my little pinto and I get out my charts, you know, and I come back in. I go to the dining table. I lay out all my charts. And I said, because Jesus says this in Revelation 12 and that and da. And Emilia and Elston looks at Emilia. Well, honey, you want to repeat that and just see what this is all about and why she's telling you why she wants to become a Baha'i? She said, Al, no, not really. And he said, for God's sake, can we just turn this conversation? Yes, Sabine, we have something called a card. So I signed my card. And Emilia said, but under one condition. And Al looks at her that she reads the books from here on forward. And so she gives me this stack of books that she had plenty of, and I go home and I lived happy ever after. But then my soul believer, right? So, and I want to cut to the chase now. So it wasn't really all that easy because I was a soul believer. So I didn't have much support by high community around me, right? I moved to Maui. Puva Murdy Singer Rice, mass teaching around the country, bribed and not be called well, and the whole thing, right? Door-to-door teaching. And I'm going, wow, this is amazing, moving from soul believer, moving right into a mass teaching, door-to-door environment in Maui. And so I thought, wow, this is oh man, I didn't know this is what I joined. This is cool. So I went with them and I did all my door-to-door thing with them. I was a tag along, basically, right? And so I observed, we used to have what today is called Anna's presentation. In those days, we had the flip book too, right? It was a green one, then the yellow one, then the red one. I don't know if you're old enough to remember the days, but it's basically the forerunner to Anna's presentation, right? So I thought that's good because I need this. And, I don't know what I'm talking about. Long story short, so I go through that. And then one day, my first mentor I met, he says to me, I said to him, well, you Baha'is this and you Baha'is that. And he said, what's this, you Baha'is? And he said, I thought you were a Baha'i by now, like 4 years, right? I mean, so embarrassing. And I was still kind of observing and kind of figuring out, but I wasn't really there. And so then all of a sudden, he says, okay, you're going to get on a plane, you're going to meet Ruth Moffat, and you're going to meet Saeed Khedivi, and this is the summer school, right? And I want you to pay close attention. Don't talk, just listen, right? So I get there, and I'm just going to give you this explanation. How bad is bad? None of you can be as bad as I was. And Saeed Khedivi gives this talk on the Dawn Breakers, right? And he goes for dues and Mullah Hussein this and Mullah Hussein again and Mullah Hussein again and Mullah Hussein again. And I'm going, and there are only about 800 there. And I raised my hand, sitting basically in the front row. These are your wake up moments as a Baha'i. And I said, excuse me, Mullah Hussein. Never heard of him. Who's Mullah Hussein? I thought half the room would raise their hand. And I look around like I kind of, like feeling smirky, right? And he said, who said that? And he says, how long have you been in Baha'i? I told him like 4 years or something, right? He says, sweetheart, sit down. I need to talk to you afterwards. By the silence in the room, I knew I just did something that was going to be a learning lesson in my life, right? So I went quietly. 2 years later, he gave us handouts. I handed them back to him corrected because I then delved into it for 2 years, night and day. I did nothing but breathe the Dawn Breakers. But we won't go into that. But trust me, the first Hawaii Baha'i history calendar I did for 20 years was on the Dawn Breaker and on the Bab. And I thought I can't be the only one who doesn't know today Mullah Hussein and today Hudus and today Fort Tabarsi and today, you know what I'm saying? So my first history calendar that later on, Ruhir Khanum asked about 3/4 Sabbathdown asked for about 30,000 to bring to Africa. But, so you learn by all your horrible mistakes. Okay. So now I'm in Hawaii, and sooner or later, sad to say, and he's passed away, but I ended up in divorce because my divorced but late husband, who ended up in Parkinson, became a Jehovah's Witness. He took my children into becoming Jehovah's Witness. So my tragedy in my life is that my children and my grandchildren are all Jehovah's Witnesses. And when that occurred, at that point, I knew I wasn't able to survive that. He couldn't understand the Baha'i faith. He signed one up just because of me. And he felt his true calling was to be a Jehovah's Witness. But then I married JT 3 years later. And I brought him into the faith, and he was charismatic. He was good looking. He knew how to give a fireside. And I learned from him. I brought him into the faith, got married. He asked me to marry him 48 hours later. That's just another story for another time. Hey, us girls, we can get together about how that worked. And so we get into, I'm now married to JT. And here comes again my Albert Schweitzer moment. I said to him, I worked in these sort of silly jobs, and I'd done my, trip into the Pacific and all of that. And I said to him, this is what I call my Mother Teresa moment. I said to him, JT, I want to stop working, and I want to start a medical mission, and I want to go around to war-torn countries, and I want to bring medical supplies and work with orphanages. He says, you're kidding me, right? I said, no, I'm not kidding you. I was at that time at the public information officer for Child and Family Service. We had about 300 employees. I became first employee of the year, and blah, 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 blah. Long story short, the director was going in and out of the Philippines and places, but I felt I sort of got this calling. I don't know what to tell you, right? So I get my medical mission going. I get all these medical supplies, and now my real life started. Because up to then, I was a lukewarm Baha'i. I was a more understanding Baha'i. Then I became a more action Baha'i. You see what where I'm getting at, right? And so just because you understand the principles of the faith, and you understand now the dawn breakers or any of that, but do we really understand it by going, through prayers and meditation? And the last of those points is what action? So where is the action? And this is why we're talking today. Your action comes out of life experiences, right? So you heard a trust me, a tiny clip of little experiences that now I suddenly was looking at that I wasn't enough to be at home and be this amazing person in my neighborhood, though I am now also in my neighborhood. But at that time, it was it was basically my era when I became a Baha'i. Shoghi Effendi had just passed away. I became a Baha'i in 69, right? So the House of Justice was elected in 63. You know what I'm saying, right? So everything is fresh, and the hands were all coming through Hawaii. So basically, folks like us, when they came to Hawaii and stood there for a week to rest between Asia and the mainland, they kind of took time out with us. They told us to sit down, zip it, and listen. And basically, our learning was don't talk, each one teach one. It was very simple. It was a KISS theory thing. And whenever I would drive Mr. Sears, he would say, "Who did you teach today?" I said, well, I just didn't get it. You know what I'm saying? So my learning started. And so then I realized that being a Baha'i is not a learned person, as Mr. Faizi once said. And you need to understand the word that he said is not meant to be what it sounds like. He says, being a Baha'i, it's not like putting a bunch of books in the back of an ass. He meant a donkey, okay? It's not like putting a bunch of books in the back of an ass, but it is understanding that you read it and put it into action. Right? So it occurred to me that I needed to do some action. All right. So now I go with my zipping suitcases. They have them where they were about 6 foot high, fill them with medical supplies. And I decided I'll go to war-torn countries. Okay. Third mistake. And so I get to Romania, was my first experiment. So I go and met with some of the members of the House of Justice. I met in Germany with Violet Nakjavani's brother. I met, anyway, it's sort of high fun. They told me, what to do, because when I went to Romania, Ceausescu was just assassinated. And panzers were still running in the street, and I'm with my Ziploc bags there, and arriving there, and it was really pretty scary because Mr. Nakjavani and Frankfurt told me to be very careful, be very cautious, be very thoughtful how you do that. And we don't know exactly where the Baha'is were, and they had just come out of underground, and it all had started in Cluj, and I even flew up to Cluj just to meet the first Baha'is from Cluj. I wanted to be where the first local assembly was formed. To me, this wasn't an important experiment, right? Experience. Anyway, so I arrived there. And this is where my first time I had to learn as a Baha'i, when we go into action, to deal with ministers, with dignitaries, with governors, with mayors, with various hospital and orphanage directors and so on. And because Romania, and I lived in Hawaii, so there was a terrible time difference. So when I was awake, they were asleep. And when I was awake, they were, you know what I'm saying? So I had to really deal something horrible with the time differences. Anyway, so I started to work with orphanages. And so then I followed that up later on. I began to work with Mother Teresa's orphanages in India. I did it in Manila, in the Philippines. I did it in the, not only with orphanages, period, but several of them were Mother Teresa's. And I've got all the pictures there. I'm so sorry you can't see them. But then I worked in the Pacific with them. And then one day in India, I had a complete mental breakdown because after 11 years of having done that, and I was pretty exhausted because I brought 300 children into this country. And the cruel fact is that couples in this all want to adopt little girls. Rarely do they want little boys, because they think that little boys are too aggressive. It is a fact. I'm not making this up. Just take it from me. I've been in that for 11 years. And so when you go to orphanages, you will find that most of them are filled with little boys. And when China opened, and I was in China, one of the early people there, because they were filled with little girls, because number one, son is very important in China. So when children went to the orphanage, it was always the little girls. Anyway, long story short, when I was in India and I met this in the same Mother Teresa's office, I met this little boy when he was 3 years old. I remember him so well. And every time I come back to India, there he was 5 years old. Now he was 7 years old. And he comes over to me at all my altruistic and as a Baha'i, and we work in human, you know what I'm saying? We work in that area. And this little boy sees me. He's 7 years old now. He comes, races over to me in the where I'm standing, and he flings himself on my ankles. And I look at him, and I didn't know what just happened, right? And what he had learned is that all the little boys didn't leave this place, and all the little girls were gone in no time. And he suddenly knew that he was never going to be leaving this place. He's going to age out, be out in the street, and be homeless. At the age of 7, he suddenly knew it, and he realized it. And I looked down at him. I'd known it all along. But I suddenly realized that this young child had suddenly realized. I looked down at him, and the orphanage director came over and slapped him across the face, took him by the hand and dragged him across the courtyard. And she came back to me to apologize. And I said, no need to apologize. This is my last day. I will not only never come back, I have to leave the kind of work I'm doing. I'm not really helping. What I'm just doing really is delaying the pain and the agony. And I stopped. I arrived in Honolulu, and I never looked back. And I closed it down. Having done that for many, many years. So another lesson, right? When you go into action, humanitarian service, remember what is really helping and what really is not helping. All right. So now let me get to the point where I want to share what were the lessons and why did I become a Baha'i. All right. So I want to now close that off. And I can see this now because I became Baha'i in 69 and I was 27, right? And so here I am now 80. So I've had a few years under my belt, right? And I can tell you now that reflecting back on my life of 50 years or so as a Baha'i, I have gone personally, learned, matured as a woman or as a young person, who really had a sense of a global world, who had a sense of the devastations of war and occupation, who had a devastation experience of being shunned, who had the devastating experience of hunger, and so just because you find a religion, as I had, that made sense. But ultimately, I think the lesson, as I'm 80 today and talking to you, it's not so much that you find a religion that you like because you like the red dress and all you had was blue dresses. And so suddenly now you buy the red dress and you're cool, right? It fits your whatever, right? You feel it suits you better. It's not enough reason. And as Shoghi Effendi says, we're not another religion. We're there to share and really change humanity into a world of unity. And I had all these slides to go with this, and I'm sorry, I'm just sort of blowing it. I'm amazed I can even do this without my slides. So I share with you that we have to evaluate, is it whether you're a Baha'i or you're not, you have to evaluate. As a Baha'i, we know that the language that we really carries and what we all have in common is really the language of love, right? If you go and look at science and religion, you know, all the religions, including the Quran, came to a world that only believed in flat earth society. And so that you couldn't have revelation of any kind that included science, because everybody believed in flat earth society, right? So now Baha'u'llah comes along 18 something, right? And all of a sudden, principally because they're doing Christ and, you know, Muhammad introduced a few social laws, but now Baha'u'llah comes along, putting his foot down on the equality of women. Science and religion, very different drive and very different force. And now we're coming along that we know now the earth is round, and we know there's a universe, and there might be a multiple universe. Now we're in quantum mechanics, and now we're in symmetry as above is below. And so now we're looking at the youth in this country. Most of the youth are spiritual but not religious. It's a movement that is happening that as pertaining to Pew Research, where the 20, 30-year-olds really are moving in the direction of that new atheist, not that old atheist, that new atheist doesn't believe in God, revelation, or manifestation. And so as a Baha'i, good luck, right? That's a good beginning right there. You can't take any of those three where you're going to become, okay, well, principles. And we don't believe in just being principle teaching. We need to change and transform humanity. That's the purpose of Baha'u'llah's coming, is to transform humanity. Not necessarily becoming a Baha'i, but transform humanity. Some of us, like me, try to do it through humanitarian efforts, right? And you all have different ways to do that. Some of us do it through, I've looked down the barrel of a shotgun 3 times with a rifle was this far, was about 3 feet away from me. I can tell you, it doesn't feel nice when you know any minute now it's going to be your last breath. I've also been in a boat, a 75-foot power boat, came out of the Panama Canal, and the boat we had horrendous storms. I was 30 feet in the air, the wave collapsed, and we flew through the sky, and we thought that the boat is going to split open with the pressure when we hit it. But you know what? We survived it. I know what survival is. I know what hunger is. I know the bell at the end, the wrong end of a shotgun. I know what survival is. Unfortunately, Baha'u'llah must have had different plans for me, because I don't know why he said, oh, well, I think you need to learn a few things there, girl, before you wake up. You know, and I tried to do my best. Anyway, long story short now, coming back, here we are in the age of now, looking at that new atheist. There's no youth. They say, oh, religion, yeah, that's the cause of our war. Look at ISIS, look at this, look at that, look at everything, look at the stats, right? Look at all the cause and science, look at Galileo, look at, on and on and on, and then say, God, what's God anyway? But they call it old time religion. Listen to Stephen Feld's talk is a brilliant talk, and even Tom Price, and how to talk about the old time religion, the position of God, the white man, the beard, and all of that. Why a noble essence is a very different story, right? It's today. In those days, it was still more pictorial, whereas today we know a lot of it is symbolic. So language is different now in what we call new religion versus old time religion, right? And so, but we have to learn how to do that. So if I'd say So then about 15 years ago, I said, what am I going to do? So now I retired, right? And JT dies and I marry again. I was widowed, I marry again, Peter, 15 years married, Peter dies. And here I am 80 and now I'm a widow of 2 years again. I said, what is with this? I mean, can I just can I talk to somebody up there? Somebody different up there, should I say, right? And so nobody different is sort of answering. And so I said, okay, pull yourself together, girl. You've always done that. You've always been that way. Pull yourself together. So 11 years ago, I said, okay, I'm retiring from what I did. And I said to myself, I'm going to take the principles of the Baha'i faith. I'm going to go somewhere and I'm going to talk to young people, college students, university students, high school students, visit anybody that stands still long enough that comes to a place of attraction. And so we get now 100. I opened the museum. I used to call it the Washington Baha'i History Museum, but then I realized I was missing out a lot of universities and colleges. We're in several colleges, including across the country, not just here. And in your town, you can have a virtual Unity Museum too, with a traveling handheld, museum. Anyway, so saying that, so I came up with the idea of the museum, which is the first in the world. Yeah, the Louis Gregory Museum, but it's really what we call a historical site. Louis Gregory slept here, Martha Root slept. You know what I'm saying? A museum is where you're a public museum that has exhibits open to anyway, it's a little bit of a different story. And so we have this museum, and then I had to figure out, who are we? And I said, social justice. Of course, I'm a Baha'i, right? Social justice. So I took my learning lessons of life. And then I said, okay, there's climate, there's gender, and there's race. And prejudices in all three of them, right? Listen to the news on climate, on race, and gender, right? So all the exhibits are climate, race, and gender, right? And it began to really attract people. But then we had to learn, because we are half Baha'is and half not Baha'is. So everybody had to learn how to present the idea of from League of Nations to United Nations to World Federation. What is the movement from United Nations to World Federation? What does it mean? Young people are in that. They want it, they just don't know how. And this is a global perspective. This is not a United States perspective, because Baha'u'llah says we're finished with nationalism. We're in globalism. Right now it's got a bad name, but we need to use different language in order to present it more appropriately. And to share with you, I had gone to a big office and met at that time, he was from Argentina. Anyway, I'll come back to me. All my pictures, you see what I'm saying? So sorry, you guys, you're missing the pictures. And I went to a big office and I got a real insight how United Nations and the Baha'i International offices in Geneva, in New York, and in Ethiopia, and so on. What is that? It's history. And then Dr. Julia Berger gave a talk on the history. This is all important for us to learn this. This is really important. What are the aims of the Baha'i International Community offices? How do you discuss it to bring in 75 years of that, right? I met Mildred Motorhead. I've been in her home. She's been in my home for dinner. And I remember, because my late husband, JT, when she got an award, she was looking for a good, tall, handsome guy on her arm. She wasn't going to be just dragged to the microphone. And she picked JT and she says, you hold my roses and you give me the roses when we get there. So Mildred, I remember her story really well. So being a Baha'i is understanding that you're a global citizen. How do you present the work of the Baha'i international community? How do you talk to young people that are struggling with the purpose of religion, existence of God? And how do you bring into that Baha'u'llah, if it doesn't come for changing, transforming civilization, and how do we do that, transform civilization? He said, my coming is for nothing if that's not going to happen. That's a tall order. And my lesson was, and is today, that you need to learn the pain to understand when you talk to somebody. I understand shunning. I understand racial profiling. I understand hunger. I understand war. I understand danger. I get it. And then I figured out how we can use our life experience from your perspective when you talk to somebody heart to heart, how you have to be sincere, bond. Don't go just out there and scatter everywhere invites. You have to, yes, you do that. But the truth of the matter is you have to have that heart-to-heart relationship, because you have to bring him to the inner core of the claim and station of Baha'u'llah. If you don't do that, sometimes you can, people who've been for years in study circles or in firesides or in any of that, and I'm going to put in the chat, hearttoheart.co, we developed a tool that has been sanctioned by the House of Justice and approved by the National Review Committee, where you can bring up a response in less than 7 seconds. No matter what that young college kid or what your neighbor or what your family or your friends ask you, in 7 seconds, you can bring up an answer, okay? It's just that rapid. So I want to leave you empowered. I want to leave you inspired, not that I'm inspirational, but I want to leave you inspired. I want to stay focused on transformation, how you take your life experience, that you used your purpose of so far where you have come, where your family or your friend or your neighbor, where you don't teach or share your ideas by talking. I'm sorry, which I did today, but reverse it. So do it from the bottom up. Let somebody empty their cup. Find out what is relevant to their heart, their life experience, their journey, who they are, what they are. Let that cup be emptied and only refill it with the writings from the faith. Is that good enough? I think I probably said too much, but I'm going to put heart to heart in the chat. So when you have a moment, yeah, go for it.
For everybody's purpose, Heart to Heart is a website developed by Zabine with the help of Wes Drying that essentially has sections on almost every topic under the sun that you could think about, a question you could ask. And if you log on to it, ask Wes for a password and ID to that site, you can get answers. Even if you're preparing a talk that you need to deliver somewhere.
You don't even need to register anything. I just put it in the chat, and there it is. Okay, it's yours. It's free forever. It's only got 400-some-thousand clicks on it, but trust me, it's all over the world. Okay, and it's been tested and tried. And so it's heart.now, not .com, .co. You can go to .com, but it's a dating site, and honey, have a good time. But if you wanted to look at the faith, then, remember, don't put the M on there. So it's hearttoheart.co. And then what Ajit is talking about was some of us who are Baha'i want to be Baha'i teachers. So we then later on we realize it's not enough to just have a tool. We also need to support each other. Oh my God, I've got here a friend who is a Buddhist and I don't know what to say. However, my friend who is a Hindu, I don't know what to say. Or this friend is a Boeing. Oh, this is a New Ager and I don't know how to, So this is what we do in our Baha'i Nightingales campus. That's what he is, where you register and so on. But anyway, hearttoheart.co is yours. It's on your cell phone. Now, if you hold your cell phone, it's designed in landscape. But if you hold your cell phone in portrait, at the top of Heart to Heart, at the top left, it has a lip button that says search. And then it says the slide that you go to. So if you go to a friend and you say, I don't know what you want, look at the table of content, you click on slide number 2, it comes obvious. But in search, you point it to them and say, put something in there. And they'll say love. And they put love in there and they go search. And then 20, 30 options on the topic of love within the Baha'i writings only, no personal comments whatsoever, comes up, and they pick out whatever they can put in their guns. They can put in peace. They can put in anything, resurrection, reincarnation, only way, whatever they want to put in there, climate, women, I mean, everything is in there. And so the seeker empties their own cup through the search button. So you don't have to do anything. But if you go from landscape to portrait, what happens, it says magnified text. And then you click on that, and the quote pops out in big letters in case you don't have your glasses on. So
somebody else have questions or comments they want to share?
Please. Lots of questions.
Again, I would recommend highly everybody who has an opportunity to go to Seattle. When you happen to be in Seattle, go visit the museum. It's really delightful. I had the opportunity 3 years ago, maybe 2019, I think it was, to visit the museum.
Too long, eternity.
And, attended a fireside at Zabine's home. It's really a wonderful thing to be able to do. And you're not going out knocking on doors or anything. People are coming to you to ask questions. And what a wonderful way to be able to share it.
Yeah, I reversed it. I reversed from the door-to-door thingy. I reversed it and tried to figure out how can we have them pouring to us instead of chasing them. I was sick and tired of constantly, well, my family or my friend, he's gone through this, and I talked to him a million years, blah, 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 blah. How do I know they're receptive? The house is only true so they're receptive. How do I know they're receptive? I don't even know. And I say something, then, and you know, I'm saying all of that stuff, right? And then we're running out, we're running low. And so and we can, in another webinar where we can maybe just talk about the Nightingale approach to assist. And I hope that everybody's a Baha'i here. And if not, then it's okay. And so therefore, I fear we really need to have a conversation where everybody is needed. And as if you listen to Abdul Baha and Dr. Stephen Felton and Hupa Damba talking Sweden, he says, after recognition and manifestation, the next duty and obligation is what? To teach the faith. It doesn't say proclaim the faith. To teach the faith, and Hupa Damba spells out, what does it mean? It doesn't mean, oh, I was behind, I'm a behind. It says that you make a plan. To teach the faith means you make a systematic plan with purpose of enrollment and keep them there for a year in order to sustain them. That's a very different story. And he says each one you should proclaim every day. And then out of that, that's right, Fran. And by the way, Fran, I'm counting on you coming over here, girl. I came to you in the past. It's your turn to come here.
Let me
come this way.
Let me also announce to you guys that our next speaker, March the 3rd, is a gentleman named Van Gilmer. Some of you know Van Gilmer. Van Gilmer is the choir director at the Wilmette. And quite a dynamic speaker in the Chicago area. He's on a race unity commissions, and he does a lot of great work. And somehow I talked him into agreeing to speak, and so he will speak.
And he was part of the civil rights movement. Don't forget to mention that on the counter, that famous counter. Yeah.
For those of you that are here from the Houston area, I am speaking not tomorrow, but the following Saturday on Mahatma Gandhi at the Unity Church of Christ, which is on right off Hillcroft in Houston from 3 to 5. I will be the keynote speaker at that event. And those of you that are in Houston here, please show up.
God, can you record? Can you record it? Well, I hope that I didn't bore you.
No, this was perfect. This was perfect. We Baha'is needed to hear your message. So thank you very much for sharing, Zabine. This was tremendous. And again, I hope we can get you back this time with your slides and your PowerPoint.
Yeah, it's so different, because we start off, what is the purpose of mankind? What is the purpose of Baha'u'llah's coming? You know, we need to have all of that in there in order to read through the quotes and understand why bother. Right? Why are we, you know, say, oh, well, I don't want to do a kiddie class or junior youth. And I don't know, I have with my wife and my spouse, I have a devotional, but I feel there's more to my Baha'i life, right? And so what I'm all about is, you are that amazing individual with your life experience, somebody, and there are lots of people out there that are looking just for you. And only you can touch the heart, and only you understand through your life experience how you can make a difference. Because if you don't reach into their heart, and if you don't listen to them, don't talk until you hurt them. Don't talk until after you had them empty their cup. In the Nightingale campus, we show you how you do that. How do you find out when somebody's receptive? You know, oh, he's black, she's white, I think they're receptive. No, it doesn't work like that. And so, you know, we have a tendency to profile seekers. Terrible mistake.
Yeah. So again, I thank Zabine, and Zabine, I'll talk to you again on Thursday, I think. And meantime, all of you, thank you for joining us. This has been very useful. This has been very wonderful, and hope to see you guys soon again. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.